Welcome to another edition of Active Living. We are going to reverse roles today. I will be your host, Jim Roback, and we have our new traveling man, George Sinnott. So George, you just visited Latin America, and what country did you visit, and how did you select this country?
Well, we actually went to Guatemala this time. We've done 3 Latin American, or I should say Central American trips in the last 3 years. The first one was to Costa Rica, and that was absolutely fantastic.
Yes, it is.
The second one was to the Canal Zone.
Oh, Panama?
Right. And the third one was to Guatemala. Of course, when you hear about Guatemala, you kind of have second thoughts. You know, you hear about all the criminals down there, and you hear about, you know, all the caravans heading north,
right,
you know, to get into the United States and all this type of thing. So I was a little bit hesitant at first to, you know, to do it. But, you know, we traveled with this company called Caravan.
Right,
and
I've heard them.
Caravan does an absolutely fantastic job. We've taken them before to the Canadian Rockies, and we took them to Guatemala, to Costa Rica and to Panama, and it's absolutely fantastic. For $1,200, you get all your meals, you get first-class hotels.
Yes.
So we decided that we would do one more, which was the last one that they really do in South America, in the Central American region, and that's at Guatemala. So anyway, we looked at it and we said, hey, that looks pretty good. Let's give it a try, especially in the middle of the winter in Michigan when it's February and it's 5 above zero with 20-mile-an-hour winds. We said, this looks pretty good. So we started out anyway. We flew into Guatemala City, and the first thing we got there, it was kind of a surprise immediately because Guatemala City is at 5,000 feet. So at 5,000 feet, we said, you know, good thing we checked the weather before we went, because we all took long sleeve shirts and coats instead of going, you know, you're thinking about Central America, you're saying, yeah, it's going to be warm, you know, but it wasn't really warm. It was like in the high 60s, 70s most of the time. So, but it was great compared to Michigan.
Oh, certainly.
But we stayed at a very nice hotel, Bartello Hotel in the middle of Guatemala City. And, you know, you hear a lot of stuff about being in the city, and it's probably not the safest place in the world, like any big city.
That's true.
It has its good areas and bad areas. And we were in a fairly good area. But even when you go to the supermarket, for example, you know, you got to go and buy your beer and wine first. That's
absolutely.
First stop, right? So you go in there, and there are armed guards, you know,
is that
just
right?
to make sure that people don't steal things. So the culture is a little different down there. The culture is there is no welfare system. So if you're out of work,
that's it.
That's it.
That's it.
You got to rely on your relatives or whatever you can steal in order to make it. So from that point of view, it's a little bit different. Costa Rica was somewhat the same. So stay in the good areas, you're fine. But
well, I think it's like, you know, you go in the good areas and you don't go out at night, you know, in specific areas that are not bad. I mean, you stay to and know your surroundings, and you stay in pretty good shape with these trips. I mean, they do an excellent job of making sure you're safe.
But the reason for our trip, well, one of the main reasons we wanted to discover a little bit more about the Mayan civilization that was there. And it was interesting because the first civilization that they found in the archaeological studies was they were there 15,000 years before Christ.
Is that right? Oh, I didn't know that far back.
Yeah. So, and they were hunters and gatherers at that point, but the culture kept getting better and better till about 3,500 BC, and they became more of a farming type of community. They actually started planting corn at about 3,500 BC, and they started forming, you know, little communities. And it became more of a community organization versus single people going out doing their thing and hunting. So we're like three or four different periods that the Mayans had there. The first period was from 15,000 BC to about 900 BC.
900.
And then at that point, they started to form these larger cities. And we were lucky enough to visit 2 of the cities. One was probably just a fantastic city called Tikal.
Tikal.
And Tikal had
read about that.
Had really not been discovered until almost 1900. It was a huge city that kept that had probably somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 Mayans there. And what happened was they, they built these huge temples, and they had this huge infrastructure even back at that point. And then from about 400 or 500 BC to about 700 or 800 AD, these structures were used heavily. They had a huge civilization, and at that point there were about a million Mayans in the Central American region, and Tikal being only one of the cities.
One of the cities.
So it was the main reason we went.
Now, how did they find it? I mean, after all those years, it was in the jungle, and it was overrun by the jungle, or
it was overrun by the jungle,
and someone discovered it.
Yep. So it was a huge revelation, and after a few years, they finally built an airstrip in there, because it took weeks to get in there because it was so far into the jungle. But the first day we were there, we kind of saw the city. But the second day, we had a tour of the city, and they took us to some nice areas, and we actually saw some big old Spanish churches. Now, one of the things that happened is about 1500 BC or AD, the Spanish came in.
Right.
And the interesting thing about the Mayans was there were 22 different languages, and they couldn't talk to each other. The various communities couldn't talk to each other. And even the area that we visited, we were on a lake towards the end of our trip. It was interesting because there were 3 different Mayan languages surrounding that lake, and they couldn't talk to each other, only in Spanish. Spanish became the prevalent language, and it was basically forced on the Mayans. There were 2 things forced on the Mayans. One was the language, and the other one, guess what?
Christianity or church.
Religion.
Religion,
you got it. Right. You got it. So that was kind of interesting. But the Spanish arrived at 1530 AD, and they basically conquered the Mayans. They were pretty nasty to the Mayans.
I think it's the same thing like the Aztecs, and even in South America. I mean, they brought disease and all that, and I don't know if this is where you talk about the loss of the Mayan culture, the whole group of people disappeared.
Yep.
And I don't know what happened. I don't know if that's because of that.
There's a lot of there's about 3 or 4 different theories on that. One is a drought, a major drought. Second one is that the Spanish brought a lot of disease, and a lot of them died.
Right.
It was disease. They just weren't accustomed to those types of germs, evidently.
Right.
So that was one of the theories, and of course, a war was another theory where they fought amongst each other. They had very powerful cities, and Tikal, for example, was actually taken over, or they were defeated by another stronger city. So that was kind of, like I say, it was kind of interesting. Like I say, we had a tour around the city, and we saw some of the really nice areas, beautiful churches, government buildings, but we also saw some poor areas. And as you look at the poor areas, you see a lot of small houses, a lot of them built out of tin and tin roofs and that type of thing, and a lot of razor wire.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, you got to keep people out of your house.
To protect their properties?
And bars on the windows,
Oh my goodness.
So that was just the way of life down there. But the second day, of course, we stayed in a hotel overnight there in Guatemala City. But the second day, we actually drove out to a museum, and we saw an early archaeological museum with a lot of the artifacts that were there from the early times, and that was a really interesting tour. But then from there, we took a bus. We had a fairly long bus drive to get to Tikal. So on the way, we actually stopped at a place called Kuriga.
Kuriga, right.
And
that's another
Kuriga
Mayan area?
was really interesting because it was a smaller Mayan city.
Right.
But they had these huge, huge stone sculptures that were probably 40 feet high, and they weighed tons.
Almost like the Morai statues on Easter Islands, and these huge stone faces. Yeah, okay.
And they were heavily carved, and this is where the theory is that they invented their own alphabet in series of symbols.
Oh my God! So
they invented the calendar. They even way back. They had their own calendar. They knew a lot about the stars and the movement of the planets and so on. But these huge rocks were fully carved. They had sacrifices there, human sacrifices.
Oh, is that right? So they'd have it.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't know the Mayans had that too.
But there were stories about the various rulers that were all carved into these rocks. And the interesting thing was there was no metal or steel to carve the rocks. And don't ask me how they do it. I think they did it with harder rocks. Most of the carvings were in sandstone.
In sandstone?
So I think they used harder rocks to do all of the carvings. And they are very, very intricate. They got, symbols for just about anything you can imagine, which was really interesting. And then we kept going towards Tikal, and we stopped near this beautiful bay, had dinner on a restaurant overlooking the bay, which was kind of really nice. And then we proceeded on up to a town called Petinchel.
Petinchel, okay.
Petinchel. And another beautiful hotel. We had a very nice place to stay. We stayed in cabins with upstairs and downstairs, so we had two couples in each.
Two couples. I say
in each cabin, and again a beautiful pool area, and great food.
You didn't forget to bring your swimming trunks, did you?
Oh, I brought them.
Okay, good. All right.
We had great food, and that night they gave us a show. They had a dancing group of Mayans descendants come in and do a dance, and they did some dances for us, and they showed us, some of their garb that they wear.
The costumes and such?
Yeah, costumes and dresses and so on. So that was really quite interesting as well.
Probably pretty colorful too. They have a lot of the oranges and yellows out, and that was the same
yellows,
thing.
A lot of yellows.
Yeah, they're very bright colors. I think maybe because to reflect the sun or something like that instead of dark clothes.
I don't know.
I don't know, but it's.
But anyway, they have these two characters. One is a very tall lady. I don't know if they're on stilts or what, but they have this very tall lady in the dance, and they have this guy who has his body through a horse, and he's going around the floor as a horse, which is kind of interesting. So it's part of the culture. But then we stayed there that night, and the following day we actually went to Tikal.
Oh, Tikal again.
And it wasn't very far from where our hotel was.
I see.
And what a fantastic site! I mean, there's dozens of structures there. I mean, it's huge.
Just huge complex.
And it's I don't know how many square acres it is, but it's got to be at least 30 or 40, 50 acres of, mostly of the huge. Well, they're like a pyramid almost.
Yeah, right.
And they honored their leaders at the time. So they have dozens of these huge architectural things. And again, what I'd like to do at this point is show a little video.
Okay.
right, we're back, Jim.
Okay. All right.
So that gives you a little idea of the of what Tikal looks like. It's kind of an aerial view of all of the various structures. Now, when we got there, if you weren't able to walk, they had a little truck that gave you.
Like they call it tuk-tuks. I don't know if they call them. That's what they call them.
Well, it was
yeah,
it was a real rustic truck. You had a little
like a sidecar or something.
Little truck with benches in the back.
Oh,
it was basically like a pickup truck with benches in the back.
Oh, okay.
So if you weren't able to walk, you could
jump on these.
You could jump on that and go through the various structures.
Well, I thought they had a lot of trails there you could walk. Is that what you had a chance to walk?
Yeah, we walked a lot. And also, a couple of the structures, they had built stairs so that you could actually go to the top of the structures.
Oh, you could?
From the back where you couldn't see them from the normal area. But they had built these stairs that you could actually climb up to the top of the structures. And I'll show some pictures from the top of a couple of structures where you can actually look over the jungle and see the structures protruding from the top of the trees, through the top of the trees.
Oh my!
Which was really good.
What do they call these? I understood like there's twin pyramids at the at Tikal there. I mean, like there's two large temples, or are they together, or what do you recall from that?
I don't remember the names.
Okay.
And of course, everything was in Spanish.
Oh
down
yes,
there,
right.
So
you just look and see, right?
Yeah, right.
Take it in.
But like I say, the whole complex wasn't discovered until the very late 1800s.
I know. I heard. Yes, that's right.
And so there's quite a few people that travel there today.
I think it's a good place to visit. I think better than what you were talking about. Colombia would be another country, it'd be really scary. But Guatemala, like you say, it's got to be careful, like any of those Latin American countries.
But once you get away from the big city, it's fine.
Right, it's fine.
Yeah, we didn't have any issues at all. The people were great. We didn't, we had a great guide.
You got to have that.
And this guy was kind of interesting, because Guatemala had a war that lasted. I shouldn't say a war. Well, it was a war.
Civil War.
Civil War.
Yeah, okay.
That lasted 35 years.
Oh my God.
And 200,000 people killed. And our guide was actually drafted to go in the army
is that right?
to fight these rebels 2 or 3 different times over the 35-year period.
What was the war for? I mean, just this.
Well, it was
territory, or
basically rich against the poor, poor against the rich.
Okay.
Yeah. You had these rulers that had everything, and the people were kind of scratching to make a living. So it's a typical type of revolution that you would get. So anyway, that was our time in Tikal, which was really fantastic.
Sure, sounds like it.
Then another long day on the bus, because it was like 7 hours to get to this place. So our bus ride goes back to Antigua.
Antigua, okay.
Antigua was the former capital of Guatemala until it was ruined by some earthquake, some volcanoes erupting and earthquakes. So, but it's been rebuilt.
Rebuilt.
And it's really a nice city. We had a very nice hotel, again, swimming pool, the whole thing. I got to say one thing about Caravan. The hotels are always first class.
Yeah.
They're always first class, and great meals there. Like I say, we were about 2 or 3 blocks from the central square of the town, so you could walk into town and see what was going on.
And spend your money, buy souvenirs, right?
Well, that was a bad thing about there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because once you get out in the street, you got these street vendors, and they're like leeches. They hang on, they grab a hold of you.
Oh, is that right?
And they walk around with you all through the city.
Oh,
they
yeah.
won't let you go.
Yeah, I know.
So they want to sell you, a lot of clothing type items, and that type of thing. I bought one thing when I was over there. I bought a Guatemalan flute.
Okay.
Made out of wood, but they're selling all kinds of clothing type stuff that they handmade. They're really beautiful.
The good stuff.
They're really beautiful things, and they're really cheap.
Oh.
But my wife wanted to buy some stuff, but those little people are small.
Oh,
Buying people are short. I would say the average man is probably, I don't know, 5'3" or 4"
Yeah,
maybe.
right, right.
And the women are
or
shorter.
even shorter,
than that.
yeah, yeah.
So you got these little women following you around, you know. And my name is so and so. Please buy from me, you know.
Right, right.
So anyway, we had to kind of put up with that a little bit. But Antigua was a great town. And like I say, we took a tour of the town, had a nice restaurant for lunch there. And by the way, Caravan provides all the meals.
All of them?
All the meals.
So it's all inclusive then?
All the meals. All the meals.
Oh, great.
Okay?
Oh, I got to check that
Now,
out.
if you had an alcoholic drink.
Well, that's extra, yeah.
Yeah.
Understand, yeah.
But really, really, really great.
Really great.
We left the next day, and we went to a coffee plantation, which was kind of interesting. You know, you see, you know, the coffee plants and the beans and how they're grown, and then they had this huge big parking lot like structure with where they put the beans to dry.
To dry out, yeah, the sun. Yeah,
they just lay them out in the sun.
Yeah,
and you get to, you know, evidently I don't know anything about coffee, but the coffee from Guatemala is supposed to be
the best.
You know, the best, right? Of course, everywhere you go, they say that.
We say that in Costa Rica when I was down there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I think they had a place there called Dulce, and 9% of the coffee they sold was to Starbucks.
Yeah.
So there you go. And but it's interesting. They said when they had the decaffeinated coffee, they dried out with trichloroethylene or something like that, some chemicals.
Oh, really?
I wouldn't drink that stuff if it was decaf, you know. So I don't know how they did it in, let's say, in Guatemala there. But yeah, they lay it out to dry out, and they shift them and all that stuff there. Yeah, it's quite a process.
Well, like I say, Antigua was nice. There were street musicians out on the street.
Oh, is that right?
And marimba evidently was invented down there, and you had a lot of people. You know, there was one crowd. I think there were 4 people playing the same marimba.
Oh, is that right?
Which was kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
And another thing is in the center of town, they had this huge big pool type of thing with individual stations in this building, and it was a community wash place where you could go and wash your clothes. So we had these women lined up, you know, washing their clothes in this
community thing, or
community wash type of thing.
Okay.
Which is really kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
But anyway, we did the coffee plantation. Then we went to my absolute favorite place. It's called Lake Atitlan.
Yes, right.
Atitlan.
It says most beautiful.
And it is a mountain lake. It's at 5,000 feet elevation and surrounded by 3 volcanoes.
3?
Dormant volcanoes, thank God.
Okay, yes.
Dormant volcanoes.
We hope.
And it is a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous sight. And the one thing is when we drove in, I said, wow, look at the gardens in this place. The hotel is not huge. It's probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 rooms.
Right.
And they have 8 full-time gardeners. All they do is take care, and there's not a blade of grass out of place anywhere. The bushes are all carved, you know, with various animal type structures. And the hedges and all of this stuff is really, really first class. Beautiful pool.
The cleanliness of the place.
So we spent a day there just kind of relaxing. And then we went into this little town, I can't remember the name of it now, I think Penachal or something like that.
Right.
And again, the leeches were on us like crazy, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So you got to buy something, right?
You got to buy something, right.
So, but we really liked the lake area. It was beautiful.
Oh, it is.
And one of the things we did there is they gave us a ride out on the lake. They had a boat, and they took us all out on the lake, and you could see the multi-million-dollar homes on the lake.
On the lake,
built by guess who? Rich Americans, right?
Oh, is that right? Rich Americans.
Oh yeah, and other countries as well. But just absolutely gorgeous lake. And you know, there'll be some pictures in the presentation. Okay. But we got on this boat. We started down. We had, I don't know, probably 40 people on the boat, and we got down to the end of the lake, and all of a sudden, the steering on the boat broke.
Oh, whatever.
So we're sitting there. You know, the wind is blowing us towards the shore, and finally they got in underneath the deck and got down there and fixed it. So we got back okay. But that was kind of a little side adventure that we had. But it's pretty much it for the lake area. Obviously, we packed up the next day, and we headed on back. We headed to a very nice restaurant along the way. We stopped and had a nice dinner, and ended up going back to the same hotel we were in to start with. Which is only about 10 minutes away from the airport. You know.
Oh, that's it. Oh, nice and close. That's good.
So that was pretty much our trip. You know, we saw a lot. We did a lot. It was much better trip than what I had anticipated. Yeah.
And I think that's what you find out with these traveling. They do such a fantastic job, you know, and you're just amazed when you come back and say how they put together, and so inexpensive, you know, which is really great. You know, it's amazing. And like you say, the hotels, you know, I use Gate 1, but, you know, hotels are always 4- and 5-star hotels.
Yep.
And the food is always excellent, you know, you don't have no problems there. And so, well, thank you, George. That was a very exciting and very enlightening on Guatemala. So another country we now know a little bit more about, and hope to see you on another adventure here shortly, and we'll talk about that one.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, George.
Appreciate it.